Rumor, Amazon to retool The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, sideline current showrunners after first season because it was more of a failure than they could have anticipated. Well, go figure, right? So it says, with Amazon's live-action bastardization, holy editorialization there, Batman, that was fantastic, of J.R.R. Tolkien's seminal fantasy works having underperformed by practically every metric, a new rumor suggests that the company will be sidelining its current showrunners, J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay. This was played in a clip of Chris Gore from one of Midnight's Edge's streams that they were talking about this on. And the idea here is they're talking about that their roles might be reduced to being right in the writer's room in season 2 and not running the show because they realize that you can't just hire nobodies and give them $1 billion in money and expect something good to come.
It's shocking that they would get first-time showrunners on a $1 billion project, which is guaranteed to have 5 seasons minimum.
Is it bad that my first response is like, who are those showrunners related to, though?
That
Who was like, my godson over here really
I feel like we would have heard of some nepotism theory by now, right?
I think that there's so much more nepotism than we realize because we only hear about nepotism as it relates to famous people, but we don't hear about nepotism as it relates to like doctors or like well-known, or not doctors, directors.
Doctors and directors.
Sure, whatever. Like well-known sound developers, like producers have their own network of nepotism. I'm sure
the armorer for Rust, Helen Gutierrez Reed, her dad was like a famous armorer before her.
And we actually were just talking about nepotism, and I was saying that I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but just don't lie about it and cover it up or claim that you've earned everything you have if some of it has been given to you.
Sure. I also feel like nepotism, and obviously I just introduced my own rumored aspect to this, nepotism.
Yeah.
But one of the things that comes to mind is like the blacksmith trade, you know? Like I could understand where like if you grew up around an industry and your parent was involved, like you may actually legitimately be interested in it and have maybe a more specialized knowledge than someone else. Like I don't think it disqualifies you from being good at something. I just feel like we should be transparent about it. And also in this sense where it's like new showrunners who have never done anything get $1 billion. Like it's hard not to
Amazon
be like
is
someone
the
must
opposite.
really trust you.
Yeah, Amazon is doing basically the exact opposite of transparency in every way. They're censoring fan reviews. They said that this has to be a PR success even if it's a failure in reality. And Chris Gore suggests that this was an unprecedented, unanticipated, complete failure in their eyes for 3 reasons. The quality was lacking. Secondly, the fans of the franchise, the existing fans who they knew they were going to get as viewers, disliked it wholeheartedly. And thirdly, they were overshadowed by House of the Dragon.
Yeah, he points out that this show was basically created because Jennifer Salk was who had hired these showrunners for a Conan series that Amazon Prime eventually canceled because strong male characters are just no, they're not going to do that. But they moved those as soon as those showrunners were fired. They were immediately scooped up by HBO and brought on to do House of the Dragon, which is kicking their ass in every metric. It came out before it. It's still on after it. The ratings are higher for what ratings we even know are there because Amazon's being extremely guarded with any ratings numbers outside of those first 2 weeks, which they keep touting, which as we know does not matter if that doesn't equal continued watch time. And they talk about how Jennifer Salk is really the responsibility for that, and she's in charge of production over there at Amazon Studios.
Isn't the issue of this show that the writing is absolutely atrocious?
Well, and it's combative with the people that love the source material, as we know, and that's kind of the point of this other article that we have here about X-Men 97, which says X-Men 97 writer Beau DeMayo recalls some writers on Netflix's The Witcher actively mocked the source material, says that this mindset is a recipe for disaster and bad morale, and that he's looking to avoid that for their production for X-Men 97, the animated series on Disney+.
Well, I find myself being like, you're saying that the fans didn't turn out to watch the thing, that also you altered to make it not the thing that they liked.
Yes.
Like, I don't think you understand how fans work. Fans really like the original product and will stand by it if it resembles that. You can't just change it, have the same title on it, and call it a day.
Well, they do that, though. That's actually what they do. They just put the same title on it and call it a day.
But
one interview
that doesn't work for the fans.
One interview with Beau DeMayo, they were definitely baiting him to say something about how X-Men 97 is going to improve upon the messaging that was in the first series in the 90s, and how it's going to reflect the ways that the modern world has changed.
And I remember vaguely, I can't 100% confirm this, but I remember somebody saying something already along those lines in the early articles about X-Men 97, the animated series, that they're going to update it. And as soon as you start hearing that language, you have to start becoming suspicious.
Here's exactly what he said about that. I don't know if improve would be a word I would use. I think that show is amazing in so many different ways. I think what I would say is that the generation who grew up watching the show have grown up. We have grown up, and the world is a very different place than when the show was first made. It's a question of what does the show look like knowing what we know now, and how it looks in today's world with everything that has changed and everything that hasn't changed, sadly, in our world. That's where I believe my focus has been as a storyteller. So he really gave a nothing burger answer to that, because they were clearly baiting him to say something about the ways that it shames the 90s version of the show.
And his answer, his answer was basically talking about he worked on The Witcher and noticed that, like the She-Hulk writers, seem to have an active disdain for their fan base in source material. None of them want to be writing comic book stuff. They're just making it because that's what's fashionable right now.
It's pure opportunism.
Yes. He says, I've been on a show, namely The Witcher, where some of the writers were not actively or disliked the books. So basically saying not actively fans, or they disliked the books altogether, and even made fun of actively mocking the source material. It's a recipe for disaster and bad morale. Fandom as a litmus test checks egos and makes the long nights worth it. You have to respect the work before you're allowed to add to its legacy. That's something that's missing in the comic book industry right now, is there's very little respect paid to the characters that they keep altering by the people that when you become a new writer on a character that's existed for decades and decades, you're a steward for that character. Now you're here to carry it on until the next writer is brought to then carry it on and to keep moving forward. You're not the owner. It's not it's pure hubris to believe that you're the one who should rewrite the rule book on how this character is viewed. Everyone thinks that they're that talented writer who can fundamentally change something about a character, but let's face it, most people aren't that person. And the same goes for these writers here on TV shows that feel like they're smarter than the audience, they're smarter than the person who created the source material, when they're not.
With all the... Sorry, go ahead.
So since this show is so consequential, given that the source material is so beloved internationally, would this then be the moment where hating the fans jumps the shark? Because they're gonna change the staff pretty much that's running the show, but they got a lot of money invested in it and a lot of time invested in it as well. So do you think they're gonna go? I hate saying this is the route, but like the Black Adam route, where it's gonna be like, oh, we love you guys and we respect the source material.
Just pandering on the other extreme end.
My cynical side says they're doing so to pay lip service, but
Rings of Power is not going to switch strategy, if that's what you're asking.
Also, it's sort of too late, right? Like they already
for that show,
they've dug in their heels in a spiteful way. Yeah, they've baited the cast members who are nobody's getting their breakout roles into ruining the marketing for Rings of Power before it was even out.
Funny how Black
with all
Adam
the talk
didn't
of
do that.
Representation in writers' rooms. The only person really that you need to represent is the fan of either the source material or the person who's going to be introduced to it for the first time through this project, right?
But can I give an analogous example with the video game industry?
Yeah.
Street Fighter V released, and it was the worst game in the universe. It caused COVID and cancer and all sorts of terrible swine upon the world. I mean...
That's not rumor, that's fact.
Thank you, Miss Reporter. Timcast.com, you'll see it. Go look at it.
Click on the read tab.
Yeah. You'll see it. Search Hannah Claire. She wrote it. No, but for real, it's an atrocious game, and it had a horrible reception. Thank you, second language speaker. It had a horrible.
Not making excuses.
No, I won't. Kidding. It had a horrible reception after Street Fighter 4 was a darling. They pretty much fired the guy that ran the game and brought a bunch of people. They try to fix it, and apparently this current version is really good. And Street Fighter 6 looks really impressive. And the people that they got to replace the old staff is going to be the new staff. And it looks very promising. And I wonder if this is that for the show. because a bunch of people are now very optimistic, myself included, by the way, are very optimistic about the future of that game and that franchise and the company in general. And so I wonder if this is like a low-key way of saying, like, hey, guys, this isn't going to fly anymore.
There's a really interesting part. That could be true. I think part of it is also, there was a really interesting part in that stream where they talk about how because these shows are written in a vacuum, meaning that they're all written at once, there's no way to kind of gauge audience reception of characters to change things as they go. And it wouldn't matter anyways because
I was gonna say I don't think
because they're automatically antagonistic towards the audience anyway. But he points out that back in the day on network television, when you had 22 episodes a season, you used that first 13 episodes, and then as you waited for the second half of the season to get its renewal, you could change storylines in the back 9 episodes based on which characters were getting the best fan response when they actively engaged and wanted an audience that wanted them.
Yeah, well, I remember, I don't remember the actress's name, but she plays April Ludgate on Parks and Rec. In one of the first seasons, there's like some episode where she's talking and Chris Pratt's character Andy does something, and she's like, "Yeah, I get it." Like she and then she did this interview. She's like, "Oh yeah, I did that on purpose because I just feel like at that point I had been playing the character for a little while, and I thought I could kind of like figure out." And then their relationship became a major plot point for the rest of the show. I mean, I think this is the issue with writing in a vacuum, and I would argue guaranteeing 4 seasons of a show.
Yeah.
You don't require your writer's room as well as your actors to become adaptable, and it becomes about the message you want to produce, not the message that is both organically developing out of, you know, people collaborating. You know
what
I mean?
they claim is they've got the show written out already through its completion seasons ahead,
But that's
but
not
they
good.
just started filming the second season.
All 5?
A couple of all 5.
Wow.
Like he said, one of the showrunners said, like, I know what happens on the last episode of the last season. Like, it's actually insane. But they only started filming the second season a couple of weeks ago, even
He
though
might have an
they
outline. There's
knew
no way
that they
have
had
all.
to film it way ahead of time. So the way Amazon is like 1 foot in, 1 foot out on the project, even after taking this deal with the Tolkien estate, that they have to finish it 5 seasons out. It just shows that they don't actually have an investment in this project.
There are examples of that being done well. I love the show Bosch, and those seasons are all written. Those are based on what?
Oh, sorry.
Michael Connelly books, and so they take different storylines in the show from the various Michael Connelly books based on that character. And they're all written at once, filmed at once, and then released all at one time.
I would argue that, like, if you're adapting a book that is like a long-standing series, like
Well,
those
they're not
characters,
adapting
like that's
one.
why what's House of the Dragon based off of? That
Game of Thrones?
Game of Thrones, thank you. Game of Thrones, like, had an audience. It already had fandom with the books. The TV show made it bigger, and there are some people who don't read the books, they just watch the show, right? Those characters are developed. Writing 5 seasons of a show with however many episodes that far in advance, to me, it sounds like they'll dig their heels in and they want certain things to happen. And that is problematic for a lot of reasons. Predominantly because what if you have an actor who can't carry off that part? Therefore, the character becomes not convincing, so that storyline falls
Well,
apart.
that's what I'm saying.
Like,
They
they're
could've-
putting themselves in a position where they've not only offended the fans, but they have handcuffed themselves to a message or to a storyline that, like, has no flexibility. I just think this is doomed from the beginning because it sounds like someone in this decision-making tree has an idea of what they want to produce, and they are hell-bent on it, whether or not it's actually good for anyone involved.
They're in a
could've-
defensive posture where they have to preempt the backlash that they're going to get, rather than, like Brett said, trying to craft the TV show to appeal to what the fans of it want.
There's no
over
joy.
time.
There's no joy.
flexibility.
There's no joy. There's no gratitude. There's no idea that you have about when you're watching these shows that they feel honored to write this stuff or honored to adapt these characters. All you feel is spite and disdain when you watch this stuff. If not just factory, even worse, like factory line writing that could have been written by an AI program.
Do you
And-
think it's that like they feel disdainful for the fandom or for the
I think they f-
material? I mean, because if it's $1 billion shoe, someone's got to be excited to work on it.
I actually think it's worse. I think a lot of it is like, imagine like you're hired to write this show, right? And you're like, if you're a Tolkien fan and you really love his work, maybe you see that as a challenge and you can't wait to work on this challenge. But imagine you don't really care about it, and then you're being told to adapt this work that everybody loves. You're actually going to feel resentful towards the material, because you know on the top of your head that it's never going to reach the heights of the stuff that you're adapting it based on.
Well, that's why I think we should stop adapting things that are already in existence.
That's
But as we
Disdain-
know, I don't need to open that door.
So what's the point of firing all these people then if they're just gonna dig their heels?
Well, it's the showrunners.
Well, they're not
the-
even getting fired. They're just getting shifted around for 1 or 2 other people who probably are equally as bad at their job, right?
Well, it
or
won't
equally
matter.
disdainful. And I think that disdain, it does get aimed at all fans of the fantasy genre
in particular,
in particular,
sci-fi.
and sci-fi, but it is also for the original author. It is for Tolkien specifically, because there's this idea that like he didn't deserve the success and fame and the legacy that followed his works. And that's an immense body of work, by the way, that I'm sure not all the people working on this project are familiar with, even slightly.
Also, I should point out that the example I gave of Bosch, Michael Connolly was in the writer's room on the show. So he was part of the writing team on the show as well as the writer of the novels. So he was involved in the entire
And George
process.
R.R. Martin is very decidedly not a part of
Yeah.
House of the Dragon.
He's too busy not writing the
Right.
final book.
Well, he says he's writing it, but
What was your theory on that?
I think it's done. I think it's done, and he's not going to let it come out until he's dead.
I think I would do that too.
That like he just
I don't
he
need to know what
doesn't-
people
he
think of
doesn't-
my body of work.
Well, he's like he's already
Really?
built this legacy. Like
Yeah.
he's
Also,
never
no one's
gonna
going to be happy with it. Right?
there's already a
Like,
faction of his fan base that dislikes him.
That's what I mean. Like, you know, you've made all this money. You might as well just keep your book, publish it after you die so your kids get some extra money. And also, then you don't have to listen to anyone be like, you did this thing? I thought you were going to do this thing. You know what I mean?
the-
Yeah.
Like,
That's actually a side plot on the show iZombie, where the character of Clive, who's extremely buttoned down and unemotional, gets really upset whenever George R.R. Martin gets brought up, because he's like, whatever he's doing right now, he's not writing when he should be writing. Like that's a huge plot line.
I have a mix of your theory and mine, which is that he already had it written, but then the show got ahead of him, and it got such a bad reception because it was poorly done, not necessarily because the plot was bad. And people were like, "Oh my god, this sucks!" And then he's like, "Oh yeah, right."
that was the worst.
Why would you ever do that? He's like erasing everything and starting over.
That would be funny. I also like that idea.
So yeah, to me, it's a lot of disdain, and it's a lot of pushback for stuff that doesn't need to be there, because these people are being forced to adapt things that reach levels of success that they're never going to find.
There's so
Like-
much dishonesty about it that comes out when you get into arguments with people about things like this on the internet specifically. Like, I'm sure that if you got down to the very point of it, where this disdain for Tolkien's fan base comes from, it's the fact that the author was a privileged white man
Yeah.
who had chauvinistic ideas about, you know, women and masculine strength and what a hero is supposed to
Has
be.
Amazon like put out a statement about that?
They won't even address the fact
They
that the
haven't even
ratings are
addressed.
bad.
They barely even addressed that Tolkien exists.
I want to.
And like, he also was religious, and
Yeah.
we know that they don't want to address that publicly either.
I've got a question, and it's kind of just floating around in my head, so I'm going to try and verbalize this the best way I can. Do you think the fact that they see all works as something that can be adapted and reimagined, do you think that speaks to their inability to create their own thing?
Yes.
And without the ability to create on your own, you don't have any actual understanding, like a functional understanding of what it's like to create your own thing from scratch. And without that, it keeps them from having the amount of respect necessary to adapt the work.
I think it's twofold. I think that there are a lot of people who are sort of told not to be creative because creativity comes with risks, and therefore they are out of practice. They literally could not, if you ask them to, come up with an original body of work completely. And that's hard for anybody, right? To be completely 100% original. I think the other aspect is like, they don't want to, they don't care about it. Like,
Yeah.
it's not actually about the creative pursuit, right? It's about fame for most people. They want their name attached to something. So even if they don't like Tolkien for whatever values he has, like he is a major source of work. Lord of the Rings is a recognizable thing. And if you become the showrunner for this or the director for that, then you are automatically climbing in the Google search pages. I think that being creative doesn't pay the bills the way that people would want to, so they kind of abandon the practice. Because I think a lot of creative people at their core have some fundamental values, whether or not I agree with them, driving what they do. And that's why you see such a big difference between people who are trying to push the message and people who seem fundamentally tied to like whatever they're creating.
That may be the best argument to never do a sequel or a rerun ever again. Because if people are just doing it to get a
Welcome to my political platform.
You got my vote. Because if everyone's just doing it's like, oh, well, I worked on whatever 16, like, and they don't like it, but they just wanted a check mark for the next step, it sucks, dude.
Also, if you're like, I think there's a fundamental difference between the people who created these legendary works because they created it out of a labor of love, and it was something, it was a story, it was stories that they felt needed to be told that inspired them, and the people that are creating things, part of the Hollywood machine, aren't creating things that inspire them. They're creating things that bring them either fame, money, or both.
Yeah.
And there's just, it's almost like the impurity of it is palpable.
Well, and I would say that like people who are in Hollywood don't benefit from it the same way. Like, I think that, I don't know how to phrase this. I feel like if you were told to be creative and you had to present very vulnerably something you came up with and something that was reflective of your perspective of the world or whatever, like that's very challenging to do. It's much easier to be the person who's like, well, I know this movie made a lot of money, but I have decided based on today's cultural norms, these are the errors with those characters. So now I will go back and re-release this thing using the fame and fandom, but correcting it so I look virtuous, right? They are not...
That's abhorrent.
Yeah, but that's what it is.
I'm sure there are also so many people who are ready and willing to create new stories, and they just need the backing of, you know, a studio like Amazon or even a smaller one, but they're just not getting it because that's not winning right now.
Well, and those stories do exist,
right? Yeah, and there's a risk to it.
Those stories do exist in arguably. Like I said, I find more good stuff to watch. I go out of my way to find stuff that's not getting press, not in like obscure way, but just like I said, like Terminalist is not a good example because Chris Pratt got a bunch of backlash.
The Peripheral is a good example. Yeah, I didn't see a lot of press for that.
There was almost no press for The Peripheral.
However, it wasn't good.
I enjoyed the first 2 episodes of Peripheral, and I wasn't a huge Westworld guy or anything like that. But it's like I'm saying, I find a lot more enjoyment because it feels like in one of the YouTubers that I love, Comics Matter, always talks about how pop culture today feels like homework. Mm-hmm. Everything feels like you have to watch this, and then to watch this you got to watch these 3 series that connect to it, and you have to know about this. Like a lot of times Caper 2 X will be like, watch the Emergency Awesome video breaking down all this stuff. I don't want to watch stuff that I feel burdened to watch. I want to watch stuff that I don't feel like pausing 500
times. And even
times.
if it's connected to a larger body of work, it should still be able to stand up alone as a piece of entertainment without that context.
Yep.
I think it's so interesting because Amazon has the financial resources and customer base to actually be, excuse me, sir, I'm talking.
It was you interrupting you.
Oh, how meta. No, I think Amazon has the customer base and financial support to be able to back independent creators. So like whether it be smaller movie houses or doing whatever, like they could give them the money and the platform and the access to an audience like no one else and still be financially secure, because even if people say like, I'm going to cancel my Amazon account because I don't like this thing that you let come out, like that's not enough to hurt Amazon's bottom line. You know what I mean? Like so many people rely and depend on Amazon. Yep. So theoretically they're in the best position to allow up and coming creative people to take risks and introduce like a breath of fresh air to this industry, but they won't do it because ultimately they'd rather recycle content and again rise through the Google ranks.
I think that stuff does get made. We just don't hear press about it. Like, how many things do you scroll through? If you do, like, I know you don't go on streaming services that much, but if the average person is scrolling through, I think they said the average person spends 5 minutes before they even find something they want to watch, if
But
not
this
longer.
is like, that's why I liked Netflix back in the day, because I knew that there were a ton of stuff that, like, you know, you may never meet anyone else who'd seen the movie, but like you were getting access to a lot of different kinds of things. But now the Netflix algorithm, and I'm sure the Amazon one works the same way, will feed you what it's trying to get you to, or what the most amount of people have clicked on, which isn't necessarily the same thing as like supporting
even
a small
lot
creator.
Of the originals on a Netflix or Hulu or Amazon are stories that they dramatize from real events, so you're still not writing your own story. It's still the lowest possible effort.
And it's so unfortunate, because I know the kind of people that would be brought to tears to work for a project like that.
But they never hire those. It's like they talk about how the superhero costumes are oftentimes garbage. Like, why don't they hire these cosplayers who make better costumes at a quarter of the budget? Like, why would you...
It's like they want to do things to spite the people that love it.
Well, sometimes I wonder if it's like tax write-offs. Like, they have to spend a certain amount of the money that they generate each year, so they just dump money into projects that don't matter. I would prefer that you poured money into essentially the small business of movie making, like small independent creators, but they're not going to.
Warner Brothers got to $2 billion already. They're $2 billion into their tax write-offs already. Like, Zaslav's just there with a scythe. Just
Like what if Amazon was like, it doesn't matter if whatever Lord of the Rings thing does well, like that's our tax write-off for a while.
But there's no shortage of trash in like the independent or indie film genre.
Not
like,
everything is a
no
hit just
matter
'cause
the
it's
price
independent.
tag, there is a whole creative drought going on right now that we're suffering through, and hopefully it will end soon.
There's like B movie. It literally is like the home of B movies, right? Like, I watched a movie over the weekend called The Contractor with Chris Pine. It's like, it's less than a B movie. It's a B- or a C movie, but I'm like, you know what? There's
a certain charm to it.
There's a certain
Is that
charm.
what you think?
It was too late to make the Sniper, American Sniper Part 2, and it's already been.
Why would we make a Part 2?
I'm saying genre-wise that it's in the same realm, right? It looks like it's the type of movie that got like one that didn't go through any rewrites. Like, it could have been better if there had been more attention paid to the script, but money gets dumped into those things too. They just get no press.
You know what I want to see is an update from Jeff Bezos' son.
How did he feel about
who
it?
originally told Jeff Bezos, "Dad, please don't F this up for me." He is reportedly a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings franchise, loves the books, loves the films, and he was asking his father, like, please don't F this up for me.
Oh my God.
Dad,
I would love to hear an update from Jeff Bezos' son on what he thinks of Rings of Power.
Okay, new theory. Jeff Bezos bought into this and backed it up to try and win back his kids after his disastrous divorce from their mom.
There's going to be an Amazon original about this.
They're like old enough to be like, we're not coming over for Thanksgiving. And he's like, please, I made a cool new thing.
I'll buy you Lord of the Rings. Please, just let me buy your affection.
Divorced kids, man. What is the craziest thing your parent bought you to win your affection?
Thanks for watching this clip, guys. If you want to see full episodes or follow us on social media, links are in the description below. Bye.
Bye.